The vote to exile humanity had already passed before Ambassador Imani's soul reached the center of the Celestial Senate, and she knew it from the silence. 300 alien civilizations sat above her in rings of pearl-white stone, their banners hanging motionless in the artificial gravity, their faces turned away with the careful shame of people who had finished the betrayal before the victim arrived. The presiding chancellor did not look at her when he spoke. By majority accord, Earth is hereby removed from all Senate protections, trade corridors, medical exchanges, jumpgate access, and collective defense agreements. Effective immediately, humanity is classified as an unstable developing species. For one heartbeat, Imani heard nothing but her own breathing. Not unstable when human miners repaired broken alien life support systems during the Vair famine. Not unstable when Earth ships crossed plague zones to deliver vaccines no one else would risk carrying. Not unstable when human engineers rebuilt 3 collapsed gates the Senate itself had abandoned because the cost-benefit reports said the trapped colonies were already lost. But today, humanity was unstable. Today, because a human research team had entered the morning expanse, a dead region of space erased from official star maps, the entire galaxy had suddenly remembered how dangerous humans were. Imani stood alone on the Senate floor, dressed in the dark blue diplomatic uniform of United Earth, her silver collar pin catching the cold overhead light. She did not bow. She did not plead. She looked up at the hundreds of watching species and saw fear hiding behind judgment. Ancient delegates who had mocked humans for decades would not meet her eyes. Military representatives kept their hands close to emergency controls. Even the chancellor's voice carried the tight precision of someone reciting a sentence before the prisoner could ask what crime had truly been committed. Then her private wrist comm vibrated. No Senate device should have worked inside that chamber. Every independent signal was blocked by treaty law and security lattice. Yet the small human-built comm on Imani's wrist flickered once, bypassing the most advanced diplomatic firewall in known space with the ugly, stubborn simplicity of Earth encryption. The message was from Dr. Theo Arden, lead biologist of the Forbidden Expedition. Only 4 words came through. It hurt us caring. Imani's blood went cold. Across the chamber, one of the oldest delegates, an insectal historian from a species that remembered wars older than Earth's oceans, suddenly lowered its head as if in mourning. Another delegate whispered something too softly for the translation field to catch, but the emotional lights above the chamber shifted from cold blue to alarm red. The chancellors saw the change. So did the security officers. So did every species that had voted to cast humanity into the dark. Imani slowly closed her hand over the comm. "What?" she asked, her voice calm enough to make the chamber listen. "Are you really afraid we found?" No one answered. Then, somewhere far beyond Senate space, inside the dead heart of the morning expanse, a moon cracked open and released a pulse so powerful that every stargate in the galaxy screamed at once. The scream of the stargates did not sound like machinery failing. It sounded like a living thing remembering pain. Across the Celestial Senate, every banner stirred in the artificial gravity though no air moved. The enormous chamber, built to make individual species feel small before the weight of galactic law, suddenly felt too fragile to contain the fear rising inside it. 300 delegates looked away from Ambassador Imani Sol and toward their own emergency displays as red warnings bloomed across every diplomatic console. Gate networks were not supposed to scream. They did not possess voice, emotion, or panic. They were ancient transit machines maintained by committee and treaty, predictable down to the fraction of a pulse. Yet every jump gate in the known galaxy had just transmitted the same sound. Imani stood alone on the Senate floor, wrist comm still hidden beneath her closed hand, and watched the mighty become confused. That was the first crack. Not in their walls, not in their security systems, but in the illusion that they understood everything worth understanding. For decades, the Senate had treated humanity like a clever animal recently taught to sit at a table. Now something older than the table had spoken, and every ancient face above her had gone pale in whatever way its biology allowed. The Chancellor's voice sharpened. Security containment. Seal the chamber. Cut all unsanctioned transmissions. A ring of silver drones unfolded from the ceiling, their lens eyes sweeping toward Imani. They had no weapons visible because the Senate considered visible weapons vulgar, but every diplomat in the room knew the drones could paralyze a target, strip neural data, and erase communications faster than most species could blink. They descended in a smooth circle around her, bright and silent. Imani did not move. Humans had learned very early that panic gives powerful people permission to call fear proof of guilt. "My government has been exiled," she said, projecting her voice into the stunned chamber. "My credentials have been revoked. By your own ruling, I am no longer under Senate procedural authority." The Chancellor finally looked at her. His species had no eyelids, only a translucent membrane that tightened across his black-gold eyes when emotion threatened his control. It tightened now. "You are standing inside Senate jurisdiction. And you are interfering with the private property of a non-member citizen." The absurdity of the statement should have made someone laugh. No one did. That was the second crack. Imani saw it spreading through the room, one calculation at a time. The Senate had built an entire civilization out of laws, clauses, exclusions, and precedents. Humans had spent their short membership reading every line, every loophole, every insult hidden in polite language. If the Senate wanted to make Earth an outsider, then Earth would wear outsider status like armor. Her wrist comm vibrated again. This time the message was not text. It was an image, distorted by distance and static, but clear enough to stop her breath. A cracked moon hung inside a dark red nebula, its surface split by glowing golden veins. Below the fracture, something vast moved beneath the stone, not breaking outward yet, but shifting. Like a sleeper turning toward a voice. In the foreground, a human expedition medic in a pressure suit knelt over a wounded alien scout, pressing a sealant patch to the creature's torn breathing membrane while black root-like tendrils rose from the moon dust around them. Then came Theo Arden's voice, broken and awed. It did not respond to scans. It did not respond to drilling. It did not respond when the scout ship crashed. But when Lin crossed the field to save him, the entire structure pulsed. The image glitched. For half a second, Imani saw the medic's gloved hand touching the alien's blood-slick armor while golden light flowed beneath the moon's skin in a pattern like veins waking around a heart. Theo's voice returned, lower now. "Imani, I think it was waiting for a choice." The transmission cut. The drones hovered closer. High above, one delegate rose from the seventh ring. He was old even by the standards of species that measured history in millennia, a narrow-boned being named Archivist Severin, whose pale skin carried faint blue lines like rivers under ice. During Imani's 11 years of diplomatic service, Severin had never once defended humanity in public. He had corrected her legal phrasing, questioned Earth's emotional decision-making, and referred to human policy as impressive improvisation with unfortunate consequences. Now he stood with both hands resting on the rail before him, and his voice entered the translation field with the careful weight of a creature about to betray his own side. "Chancellor," Severin said, "if the pulse originated in the morning expanse, chamber containment will not matter." The Chancellor's membranes tightened further. "Sit down, Archivist." "I have sat down for 300 years. The chamber went completely still. Imani looked up at him, and for the first time since the vote, she saw something in the room that was not fear or shame. It was exhaustion. Old exhaustion. The kind carried by someone who had guarded a truth for so long that secrecy had become a second skeleton. Severin turned his gaze to her. "Ambassador Soul, your team found the heart below." The name moved through the chamber like a forbidden prayer. Several delegates recoiled. One aquatic envoy's tank darkened with defensive ink. A military representative from the outer defense block slammed 3 hands against its emergency console, demanding that Severin be silenced, but the translation field had already carried the words to every species present. Imani's mind raced. The heart below. Not an anomaly. Not a weapon. Not a hazard. A named thing. A known thing. "You knew it was there," she said. Severin bowed his head once, not in apology, but in confirmation. "Some of us knew fragments." The Chancellor's voice became dangerous. "Archivist Severin, you are violating sealed historical restrictions." "No," Severin said. "I am watching those restrictions fail." Another pulse struck the Senate station. This one did not scream through the gates. It passed through the chamber itself as warmth. Not heat from a source, but the intimate warmth of being seen by something vast and attentive. For one impossible second, Imani smelled rain on concrete after a summer storm on Earth. She heard children laughing in a refugee shelter on Vare after human doctors restored oxygen flow. She felt the ache of every decision humanity had made, not because it was profitable, not because it was strategic, but because someone was suffering and a human had decided that was reason enough. Around her, alien delegates reacted in confusion, discomfort, even terror. But Imani understood why Theo had sounded afraid and reverent at the same time. The thing beneath the cracked moon was not scanning humanity's strength. It was recognizing humanity's wounds. Far away in the morning expanse, Dr. Theo Arden stood inside a trembling excavation tunnel as golden roots spread across the black walls and wrapped gently around the injured alien scout without crushing him. The human medic, Lin, tried to pull back, but the roots formed a shelter around them both, sealing the broken atmosphere, warming the ground, and projecting symbols into the air in an ancient language no living university had fully translated. Theo's field AI rendered one phrase before its voice dissolved into static. You protected what was not yours. Then the entire moon opened one golden eye beneath his feet. The eye beneath Theo Arden's boots was larger than the excavation tunnel, larger than the outpost, larger than anything that should have been able to wake under a dead moon and still feel alive. It opened in layers of gold through the black stone, not like an animal's eye, but like a sunrise remembered by a machine that had spent ages dreaming in the dark. The tunnel walls softened around the light. The golden roots stopped spreading and became still, as if the entire buried structure had turned its attention toward the small group of breathing creatures standing inside its body. Theo did not run. His legs wanted to. Every survival instinct that evolution had carved into human bones screamed that when a moon opens an eye beneath you, the reasonable response is distance. But Lin was still kneeling beside the wounded alien scout, her gloves soaked in blue-black blood, her oxygen gauge flashing low, and the roots had formed a shelter around them both. So Theo stayed where he was, because a human scientist could fear the impossible and still refuse to abandon someone trapped inside it. His field AI tried to translate the symbols forming in the air, but the words arrived incomplete, too old and too layered for clean language. Fragments appeared in broken sequence. Witness, line, mercy, dangerous, beloved, unfinished. Then the tunnel filled with voices. Not one voice. Thousands. They did not speak aloud. They pressed against Theo's mind as memories that were not his. A red desert where a colony screamed for aid while Senate ships watched from orbit and calculated survival odds. A water world whose cities drowned after a gate collapse because rescue was deemed politically inconvenient. A generation ship packed with refugees broadcasting surrender codes while its coordinates were erased from official records. Species Theo had never seen, never studied, never known existed, all calling into the dark and receiving silence from the same institutions that had just called humanity unstable. He staggered back against the tunnel wall. Lin, he whispered, though he was not sure whether his voice worked. The heart is showing us records. The medic looked up, her face pale behind her visor. Records of what? Theo tried to breathe evenly. The images kept coming, each one sharper than the last. Children with translucent skin reaching toward a failing habitat dome. Elder creatures singing death rites beside empty evacuation platforms. A small reptilian pilot using the last of his ship's power to send a warning that no one answered. Every memory carried a timestamp. Every timestamp had a Senate archive seal burned into it. Abandonment, Theo said. Not accidents. Not losses. Decisions. Above them, in the Celestial Senate, Ambassador Imani Sol watched Archivist Severin step down from the seventh ring toward the chamber floor. The silver drones adjusted around her, unsure whether to arrest one human exile or an ancient historian who had just cracked open 3 centuries of buried law. The Chancellor's security officers moved toward Severin, but stopped when the old archivist raised one hand and projected his own credentials across the chamber. The display was not a diplomatic clearance file. It was an archive key. Imani saw the Senate react before she understood what it meant. Several delegates recoiled as if Severin had drawn a weapon. Others looked suddenly, visibly afraid. Whatever that key unlocked, it was not supposed to exist in public. Severin's voice remained calm. The morning expanse was not erased because it was empty. It was erased because the First Senate feared what slept there. The Chancellor rose from his high seat. "You will end this immediately." "No," Severin said. "Humanity has been sentenced for finding a truth you had no right to bury. They deserve to know why." He turned toward Imani, and something like apology finally entered his expression. "Before the Senate, before the oldest treaties, before most of our species had names for the stars, there were the Aurelian first minds. They were not rulers. They were builders of continuance. They studied civilizations and found a pattern we were too proud to accept." The chamber lights flickered from red to a deep amber, reacting to emotional pressure from 300 species at once. Imani stood very still, because every instinct told her this was the reason they had exiled Earth. Not Theo's expedition. Not a treaty violation. Severin continued. The Aurelians believed intelligence alone was not enough to trust with power. Intelligence could build medicine or torture devices, bridges or chains, art or extinction engines. They searched for the rarer trait, the ability to care beyond ownership, beyond tribe, beyond advantage. A species that would protect the stranger, rescue the useless, mourn the distant, and defend a future it might never live to see. Imani felt the words like pressure behind her ribs. She thought of human rescue ships entering plague zones. She thought of treaties Earth signed that brought more burden than profit. She thought of all the times the Senate had called humans irrational for risking resources on people who could offer nothing back. Severin looked directly at her. The first minds built the heart below as a guardian for that trait. Not for conquest. Not for empire. For responsibility. The Chancellor slammed his staff against the floor, and the sound cracked through the chamber. "Enough. That myth has no standing." "It is not myth," Severin said. His archive key flared, and the Senate's central projection ignited. A star map unfolded above them, showing thousands of hidden distress records sealed beneath Senate classification. Red points spread across the galaxy like wounds. Imani saw names vanish from one layer and reappear in another, marked as failed colonies, unstable species, acceptable losses. Beneath every decision was a familiar pattern: abandonment dressed as policy, cruelty disguised as order, fear documented in perfect legal language. The chamber erupted. Some delegates shouted denial. Others demanded immediate recess. A few sat frozen, as if they had just learned the institution they served was built on graves. The Chancellor tried to cut the projection, but Severin's archive key held. Somewhere inside the ancient Senate system, an old truth had recognized a chance to breathe. Imani's wrist comm vibrated again. Theo's face appeared, flickering through static and golden light. He looked shaken, almost sick, but his eyes were burning with discovery. "Imani, the heart is not waking because of us alone. It is responding to every record the Senate buried. It remembers the abandoned." She stepped closer to the signal. "Can it defend itself?" Theo looked off-screen. Behind him, the tunnel walls were changing, roots rearranging into symbols faster than the AI could translate. "I do not think it wants to defend itself." "What does it want?" The wounded alien scout beside Lin stirred for the first time. His translator crackled weakly, catching a phrase that had not come from his mouth. It came from the heart, using him as a trembling instrument. "Ask the humans," the scout whispered. "They always go back for the lost." The chamber fell into a silence that felt worse than noise. Imani slowly lifted her eyes from the comm to the 300 civilizations above her. For the first time, she did not see judges. She saw witnesses. Some guilty. Some afraid. Some wondering whether the species they had just exiled was standing between them and the oldest secret in the galaxy. Then the Senate's military alarms activated. A fleet marker appeared over the morning expanse. The Chancellor's face went cold with relief, and Imani understood the next betrayal before he spoke. "Peacekeeping forces have been dispatched," he announced. The human excavation will be terminated. The phrase peacekeeping forces landed in the Celestial Senate like a blade wrapped in silk. No one in the chamber misunderstood it. The Senate never sent peacekeepers when peace was still possible. It sent them when it wanted history written by the side with cleaner uniforms and larger guns. Ambassador Imani's soul looked up at the fleet marker burning above the morning expanse and felt something colder than fear settle behind her ribs. The marker was not a warning. It was already in motion. 3 strike groups, 47 warships, medical quarantine vessels, containment barges, and a legal execution beacon carrying the authority to declare any living witness inside the expanse contaminated. The Senate had not voted on that deployment today. It had launched before her arrival. The exile hearing had not been judgment. It had been cover. You sent them before the vote, Imani said. The Chancellor did not deny it. That was how she knew the betrayal was deeper than rage. Rage would have defended itself. Guilt would have dressed itself in excuses. The Chancellor simply watched her from his elevated seat with the calm of someone who believed power made truth irrelevant. Humanity's removal from Senate protection created operational clarity, he said. The morning expanse cannot become a weapon in the hands of an unstable species. Imani almost laughed, but there was no humor left in the chamber. It healed a wounded scout. It responded to unauthorized human influence. It responded to mercy. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed beneath the translation field's shifting light. Mercy is not a governance structure, Ambassador. No, Imani said. That is why you fear it. You cannot control it with procedure. A ripple moved through the surrounding rings. Some delegates looked away again, but others did not. Severin's forbidden archive projection still hung above them, red wound points scattered across the galaxy, each one a buried decision now exposed to the species that had trusted Senate law. The Chancellor could still command ships. He could still lock channels. He could still drown the chamber in legal language. But he could no longer make the truth unseen. Then Imani's wristcom flashed with an emergency override from Earth defense. Commander Juno Reyes appeared in fractured blue light, standing on the bridge of the human carrier Resolute Dawn. Behind her, officers moved through dim combat illumination, and beyond the viewport the morning expanse stretched like a bruise across space, full of dead stars and red-black dust. Juno's face was calm in the way only trained fear could become calm. She had the square shoulders of someone who expected to be outnumbered and had arrived anyway. Ambassador, Juno said, Senate fleet just crossed the outer boundary. We count 47 vessels. They are broadcasting surrender instructions to all human assets. How many ships do we have? 12 capable of holding formation. 4 research escorts. 2 rescue cutters. 1 carrier old enough to have personality problems. Imani swallowed. Can you delay them? Juno's mouth tightened. Delay? Yes. Win? No. That honesty struck harder than a heroic promise would have. It was the kind of human courage Imani trusted most, not blind confidence, but clear-eyed refusal to leave. Do not fire first, Imani said. Juno glanced briefly off-screen, listening to a tactical update. I was hoping you would say something easier. I know. The transmission shifted, and Dr. Theo Arden appeared beside Juno's signal from the excavation tunnel beneath the cracked moon. Golden roots now covered the black walls around him in branching patterns that resembled veins, rivers, and written language all at once. The injured alien scout was alive, still weak, sheltered inside a root-formed cocoon beside Lynn, whose pressure suit was scorched and patched with field sealant. The heart below had saved them, but it had not risen. It waited, and that waiting was beginning to feel less like sleep and more like judgment. Theo, Imani said, how awake is it? Theo looked down at the golden light pulsing beneath his boots. Enough to listen. Not enough to act. Why? He hesitated, and the answer frightened her before he spoke it. I do not think it is deciding whether the Senate is a threat. I think it already knows that. I think it is deciding what humanity is. The words crossed 200 light-years and filled the space between them like a second verdict. In the Senate chamber, Severin lowered his head, as if Theo had named the truth he had most feared. The heart was not built to be commanded, he said softly. It was built to recognize. Recognize what? Imani asked. Severin looked toward the fleet marker. Whether compassion survives contact with power. The first Senate warships reached the cracked moon 15 minutes later. Juno Reyes watched them arrive through the Resolute Dawn's forward display. They came in flawless formation, silver and black hulls shining with the arrogance of civilizations that had spent centuries mistaking age for wisdom. Their lead vessel carried the white spiral of Senate enforcement across its bow, a symbol Juno had seen on humanitarian aid crates, treaty seals, peacekeeping uniforms, and now weapons arrays aimed at a moon full of scientists and wounded refugees. The Senate commander opened a channel. Its voice was genderless, polished, and bored. Earth vessels, you are operating without recognized jurisdiction. Withdraw from the morning expanse or be removed. Juno sat in her command chair, one hand resting on the armrest, the other near the emergency broadcast control. This is Commander Juno Reyes of the United Earth Defense Fleet. The site behind us contains active human research personnel, injured non-combatants, and an unknown living intelligence. We will not withdraw while lives remain at risk. You no longer possess legal standing. Good, Juno said. Then stop pretending this is law. The channel cut. The Senate fleet advanced. Below, in the excavation tunnel, the golden roots suddenly dimmed. Theo felt the change like a held breath. Lynn looked up from the alien scout, her visor reflecting the pulse of approaching weapons fire through layers of moon rock. Theo, she said, the heart is showing me something. What? Lynn's voice shook. Ships. Not ours. Small ones. Civilian signatures. Theo's console screamed as new data burst through the tunnel. The Senate fleet had not come alone. Behind the warships, hidden inside containment barges, were thousands of refugees from minor species whose colonies had been quietly cut off from aid. Living shields. Political insurance. If humanity fired on the fleet, the Senate would broadcast the deaths as proof that Earth was reckless, emotional, dangerous. Juno saw the same data from orbit. For a moment, every human ship in her formation went silent. Then one of her captains whispered over the command channel, they brought civilians. The Senate fleet opened its weapons ports. Juno's tactical officer turned toward her. Commander, permission to arm main batteries? Juno looked at the refugee signatures blinking behind enemy lines, then at the cracked moon, then at the 12 fragile human ships standing between an empire's fear and something ancient enough to judge them all. No, she said. Launch rescue craft. For 3 seconds after Commander Juno Reyes gave the order, no one on the Resolute Dawn moved, because every person on that bridge understood the madness of what she had just chosen. The Senate fleet had opened weapons ports. 47 warships were advancing with the calm precision of executioners. Humanity had 12 battered ships, 4 research escorts, 2 rescue cutters, and a carrier whose hull still carried weld scars from a border evacuation 6 years earlier. Every tactical instinct said to raise shields, arm batteries, and make the enemy pay for every kilometer. Instead, Juno had ordered rescue craft into the kill zone. Her tactical officer turned toward her, eyes wide. Commander, they will target the shuttles. I know. They will use the civilians to block our approach. I know. If we do not fire, they will cut us apart. Juno looked at the refugee signatures hidden behind Senate hulls, each blinking light representing a life the Council had decided was useful only as a shield. Then we make them show the galaxy exactly what they are. The first wave of human rescue craft launched from the Resolute Dawn like sparks from a dying fire. Small, blunt, ugly vessels built for atmosphere breaks, mining collapses, and evacuation corridors, not fleet combat. Their hulls were painted with red human rescue markings in 6 languages and 3 alien symbolic systems. They had no heavy weapons. Their shields were thin. Their pilots knew it, and still they burned straight toward the Senate formation. The enemy hesitated. That hesitation saved the first 100 lives. Rescue 1 to command, a pilot said, breathing hard over the channel. We have visual on containment barge 7. Civilian heat signatures confirmed. Multiple species. Some injured. some sedated. Proceed, Juno said. Enemy destroyer is rotating toward us. Proceed. The destroyer fired. A line of white energy crossed the battlefield and struck the rescue craft across its flank. The little ship spun, venting atmosphere, but its pilot corrected before the engines failed completely and slammed into the side of the containment barge with a docking clamp meant for asteroid debris. The channel filled with alarms, static, and one human voice swearing with astonishing creativity. Then the hatch opened. Human rescue teams poured inside. Across the fleet channel, more voices followed. Rescue 3 attached. Rescue 4 has breach access. Cutter Mercy line taking fire but still moving. We have children aboard barge 2. Repeat, children aboard. On the moon below, Dr. Theo Arden stood inside the golden-rooted tunnel and watched the heart below respond with silence. That silence terrified him more than the battle. The structure had healed the wounded scout. It had spoken through ancient symbols. It had revealed buried crimes and pulsed with recognition when Lin crossed a killing field to save a stranger. But now, when human ships were being torn open above it, when civilians were trapped between warships and fear, the heart did nothing. Theo, Lin said from beside the alien scout, her voice trembling with exhaustion, why is it waiting? He looked at the golden veins beneath his boots. They were brighter now, but still restrained, like lightning held under skin. Because this is not the attack. What? Theo swallowed as the understanding came to him in pieces. It already knows the Senate is cruel. It already knows they are afraid. This is not a test of them. The moon trembled softly. Above, a second human rescue craft exploded. Not entirely. Its forward section disintegrated under a defensive shot, but the rear compartment kept moving under emergency thrust, enough to carry 37 rescued civilians clear of the containment barge before its engine died. The escape pod drifted into open space, tumbling helplessly. A Senate frigate locked weapons onto it. Juno saw the targeting line. Resolute Dawn, intercept vector now. Her navigator looked back. Commander, that puts us between the frigate and the main battle line. Then I hope they appreciate the view. The old carrier swung its bulk across the pod's path. The frigate fired, and the blast struck the Resolute Dawn's forward shields hard enough to throw half the bridge crew from their seats. Lights burst overhead. Someone screamed from engineering. Juno hit the side of her command chair, tasted blood, and pulled herself upright. Pod status. Alive, her tactical officer said, voice breaking. They are alive. Good. Find me the next one. In the Celestial Senate, the battle feed had gone public. No one knew who had done it. Perhaps Severin. Perhaps an Earth signal engineer. Perhaps the heart below itself had decided the galaxy should witness the truth without translation. Across the chamber, 300 species watched humanity refuse the simple logic of survival. They watched human pilots fly into enemy fire not to destroy, but to retrieve. They watched Marines carry alien refugees through smoke-filled barges. They watched a human medic aboard Rescue 2 remove her own emergency oxygen cell and force it into the breathing mask of a child from a species whose government had voted to exile Earth less than an hour earlier. The chamber changed. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But the emotional lights no longer belonged to the Chancellor's control. Blue shame flickered into gold confusion. Red alarm softened into something fragile and dangerous. Imani's soul stood at the center of it and did not speak. She did not need to. The humans on the screen were doing what humanity had always done at its most inconvenient and most glorious. They were ruining someone's clean political narrative by caring in public. The Chancellor saw it happening. Cut the feed, he ordered. It is no longer routed through Senate systems, an aide whispered. Then find the source. The aide looked at the display with visible fear. We cannot. It appears to be coming from the morning expanse. On the battlefield, the Senate commander finally lost patience. Earth vessels, your actions are interfering with lawful containment. Withdraw rescue craft or they will be treated as hostile assets. Juno opened a channel, her face bruised, her uniform torn, her bridge burning behind her. They are rescue craft. They are obstructing enforcement. They are saving civilians you dragged into a battlefield. Their presence is irrelevant to the objective. Juno's eyes hardened. That sentence is why you are going to lose. The Senate fleet fired again, wider this time. Human ships absorbed what they could. Shields failed. Hulls tore open. The rescue cutters kept flying. One by one, alien civilians were pulled from the containment barges, not efficiently, not cleanly, not without loss, but with a ferocity that made even the enemy fleet hesitate before every shot. Then the heart below answered. It began with the moon. The cracked surface lit from pole to pole as golden veins erupted through black stone. The morning expanse, silent for longer than empires had existed, filled with warmth. Not heat. Recognition. Every human in the system felt it first as pressure behind the ribs, then as a voice without sound. Line behavior confirmed. Theo fell to one knee as the tunnel opened around him, not breaking, but blooming. Vast root structures unfolded beneath the moon's crust, revealing chambers larger than cities, rivers of golden light flowing through living machinery, and at the center of it all, something like a heart made of suns beating once every 1,000 years. Above the moon, every Senate weapon went dark. Not exploded. Not destroyed. Disabled with such gentle precision that even the enemy crews remained alive. Targeting systems dissolved into harmless static. Missile racks sealed themselves. Energy cores cooled. Warships that had ruled star lanes for centuries became silent monuments to their own arrogance. The human ships remained untouched. Every rescue craft, every damaged carrier, every broken shuttle carrying civilians through the kill zone glowed with a thin golden outline, protected now by something that had watched, waited, and finally chosen. In the Senate chamber, Severin lowered his head. Imani looked at the screen as the moon split wider and the heart below began to rise. Then the ancient guardian spoke across every channel in the galaxy. Humanity protects what it does not own. The first condition is met. For 6 seconds after the heart below spoke, the galaxy forgot how to answer. 300 civilizations in the Celestial Senate heard the same words, not through translation fields or official relay networks, but inside the deepest part of themselves where fear usually hid behind law. Humanity protects what it does not own. The first condition is met. The sentence moved through species that had spent centuries ranking power by fleet size, trade access, ancestral age, and treaty authority, and it struck them with the terrible simplicity of a truth no committee had voted into existence. Ambassador Imani Sol stood in the center of the Senate chamber while the emotional lights above the rings shifted into colors the system had no diplomatic category for. Gold, white, violet, and a deep red that did not mean alarm anymore. It meant exposure. Every delegate had seen the battle feed. They had seen human ships take fire instead of firing first. They had seen rescue pilots cross into lethal range for civilians whose governments had voted to abandon Earth. They had seen the Senate's warships rendered harmless by a force so ancient that it did not need to raise its voice to silence empires. The Chancellor struck his staff against the floor. This transmission is hostile interference. All member delegations will disregard unauthorized psychological influence. No one moved. That was the moment Imani understood the Senate was still standing, but its gravity had changed. Power had not vanished from the Chancellor's hands. Fleets still answered his codes. Institutions still obeyed his seals. But belief, the invisible machinery that made obedience feel natural, had begun to fail. Archivist Severin turned toward the highest ring. Chancellor, the heart has not threatened the Senate. It has shown the Senate to itself. The heart is a pre-civilizational weapon, the Chancellor snapped. No, Imani said. Her voice was quiet, but the chamber carried it. A weapon would have killed your ships. The Chancellor looked down at her with open hatred now, and Imani almost welcomed it. Hatred was honest. Hatred did not hide behind procedure and call itself peacekeeping. You think this makes humanity righteous? He asked. No, she said. It makes your excuse impossible. Far away in the morning expanse, Commander Juno Reyes watched the Senate fleet drift weaponless above the cracked moon. The battlefield had become surreal. Human rescue shuttles continued moving between disabled containment barges, their hulls outlined in golden light. Senate destroyers floated with full crews alive and engines intact, but every offensive system locked in perfect shutdown. The heart had not crushed them. It had simply removed their ability to harm. That frightened Juno more than destruction would have. A thing that could disable 47 warships without killing a single crew member was not merely powerful. It was precise. It understood restraint at a level most civilizations never reached, and now it had chosen to stand beside humanity after watching them bleed for strangers. "Commander," her tactical officer said, voice still rough from smoke inhalation, "we are receiving surrender requests from 2 containment barge crews. Not Senate military. Civilian handlers. They are saying they did not know the refugees were being used as shields." Juno stared at the display. Do we believe them? No. Do we rescue them anyway? The officer hesitated for less than a second. Yes, ma'am. Juno nodded. Then we are learning. Below the battlefield, Theo Arden moved through a chamber that had not existed an hour before. The moon's interior had unfolded around him into a cathedral of living roots and golden rivers, each pulse of light carrying fragments of memory through walls that breathed like sleeping lungs. Lin walked beside him, one arm supporting the wounded alien scout, who refused to be carried even though his legs shook with every step. The heart had opened corridors toward its center. It did not speak in orders. It offered paths, and somehow every human inside knew the difference. "Theo," Lin whispered, "look." The golden walls began to darken, not with shadow, but with images. Entire histories streamed across the root lattice. Colony worlds abandoned after resource treaties failed. Uplifted species denied medicine because they had no voting bloc. Pirate raids ignored when victims lived beyond profitable corridors. Aid requests buried in procedural review until the senders were extinct. The Senate had not simply made mistakes. It had curated suffering into silence. Theo lifted his recorder with a shaking hand. "This is too much data for our systems." The heart answered through the floor, a warmth rising into his bones. "Then give it to everyone." Theo froze. "Everyone." The chamber pulsed once. Every system. He understood then, and the scale of it nearly made him step back. The heart was not asking permission to reveal the Senate's crimes. It was asking humanity whether truth should be used as a weapon or offered as a burden. There was a difference. A weapon only needed a target. A burden needed someone willing to carry what came after. Theo opened a channel to Imani through the unstable golden relay the heart had grown around his transmitter. "Ambassador, the heart can broadcast the buried records to every inhabited system. Not just the Senate chamber. Everyone." In the Senate, Imani heard him and closed her eyes for one breath. The obvious answer was yes. Expose them. Break them. Let every species see what the Senate had hidden. Let the institution that exiled humanity choke on its own history. But she had watched humans be called unstable all her diplomatic life. She knew how easily righteous anger could become proof in the mouths of enemies. If humanity unleashed the archive as vengeance, the Chancellor would survive by naming them conquerors with better timing. "What does the heart want?" she asked. Theo's voice softened. "I think it wants to know what we want." Imani looked around the chamber. She saw guilty faces. Afraid faces. But also confused ones. Young aides staring at their own governments as if seeing them clearly for the first time. Minor delegates whose species had been too powerless to challenge sealed history. Military officers who had followed orders and now looked sick from understanding what those orders protected. She raised her head. "Broadcast everything," she said. "But include the raw records. No edits. No human commentary. No accusations. Let the truth arrive without our fingerprints on its throat." Theo exhaled. Understood. The heart below opened. Across the galaxy, screens went white. Homeworlds, stations, shipyards, universities, mining colonies, refugee shelters, military command centers, and private household walls filled with the same archive stream. Not propaganda. Not speeches. Records. Coordinates. Both. Evacuation requests. Denied medical corridors. Suppressed witness files. Species names that official history had erased now returned in full. The first hour was silence. The second was disbelief. By the third, 11-member worlds suspended their Senate delegations. By the fifth, outer colonies began broadcasting their own buried records, adding testimony to testimony until the archive became a flood no censor could dam. By the sixth, species that had voted for humanity's exile sent private signals to Earth requesting dialogue, protection, clarification, forgiveness, sometimes all at once. The Chancellor retreated from the public chamber into a sealed command sanctum beneath the Senate floor, where 6 military governors waited around a black table older than most alliances. His staff was gone. His ceremonial robes were gone. What remained was the leader beneath the law, cold, afraid, and willing to burn the framework of the galaxy to keep the throne from collapsing under him. The heart must not leave the moon, he said. One governor's crest lowered. Our fleet is disabled. The public fleet is disabled. The table opened, revealing an object no Senate record admitted still existed, a black spindle of Aurelian design, stolen from the morning expanse long before humanity reached the stars. Its surface drank light. Its gravity made the room feel smaller. Severin had called it a myth once. The Chancellor placed his hand above it. Activate the quiet seed. In the morning expanse, the heart's golden veins suddenly flickered. Theo staggered as pain rolled through the chamber. Lin grabbed the alien scout before he collapsed. Above them, Juno's displays filled with impossible readings as space around the cracked moon began to fold inward. Commander, Tactical shouted, something just entered the system from inside the Senate relay network. Juno looked at the screen and saw a black needle appear above the moon, silent and tiny compared to the heart, yet every golden root recoiled from it. Then the heart spoke again, but this time its voice carried pain. Second condition approaching. Protect even those who betrayed you. The quiet seed did not explode. It did not fire a beam or unfold into a weapon that human eyes could understand. It simply appeared above the cracked moon like a black needle in the fabric of space, and every living system around it began to make itself smaller. Golden roots withdrew from the moon's surface. The rescue shields around human craft flickered. The disabled Senate warships drifted as their crews screamed into dead channels, suddenly realizing the weapon their own leaders had activated did not distinguish between loyal soldier, trapped refugee, human rescuer, or ancient guardian. Commander Juno Reyes stood on the burning bridge of the Resolute Dawn and watched the battlefield turn into a gravity tomb. The morning expanse was folding inward around the black needle, not collapsing violently, but tightening with horrible patience. Escape vectors closed one by one. Navigation lines bent back toward the cracked moon. Even the stars beyond the nebula warped into thin red arcs, as if the universe itself were being pulled into a fist. Tactical report, Juno said. Her officers' hands shook over the console. The quiet seed is generating a containment singularity. It is not aimed at us. It is aimed at everything. Can we outrun it? No. Can the heart stop it? The officer looked at the golden lines dying across the moon's surface. Not while it is still waking. Juno felt the answer settle into her bones. The heart below had disabled a fleet without killing. It had exposed centuries of buried crimes. It had chosen restraint when it could have chosen domination. And now the Senate, faced with a power it could not command, had done what frightened empires always did. It had chosen to kill the future and call the ruins stability. The heart's voice moved through every human ship, softer now, strained by pain. Second condition approaching. Protect even those who betrayed you. Juno closed her eyes for 1 second. She saw the Senate destroyers that had fired on her rescue craft. She saw the containment crews who had carried refugees as shields. She saw the command officers who had followed orders because obedience was easier than conscience. She saw their life signs blinking inside the same collapsing field as everyone else. Her first instinct was anger. Her second was exhaustion. Her third, the one that hurt the most, was human. Open all rescue channels, she ordered. Her bridge crew turned toward her. Commander, her tactical officer said quietly, some of those ships were shooting at us 10 minutes ago. I remember. They will slow us down. I know. We may not save our own people if we save them too. Juno looked at the forward display, where refugee barges, Senate warships, human cutters, and broken shuttles all drifted inside the tightening gravity well. Then we become exactly what they accused us of not being. No one argued after that. The bridge of the Resolute Dawn, bruised, smoking, half-blind, came alive with frantic human motion. Emergency routes were drawn through impossible gravity gradients. Rescue craft that had already taken damage turned back instead of running. Human pilots cursed, prayed, laughed too loudly, and flew toward ships that had tried to kill them. Across the battlefield, the order spread. Save everyone. Not allies. Not friends. Everyone. In the Celestial Senate, Ambassador Imani Sol watched the live feed with her hands clenched at her sides. The Chancellor had disappeared into his command sanctum, but he had left behind a chamber full of witnesses who now understood too late what their obedience had purchased. Delegates who had voted for exile watched human ships attached to Senate hulls and drag enemy crews away from the Black Needle's pull. A reptilian military envoy lowered its head as a human rescue pilot burned out both engines to push one of its disabled cruisers beyond the Singularity's inner edge. An aquatic delegate wept dark ink into its tank when human medics broke open a containment barge and carried out children from a species that had publicly denounced Earth that morning. Severin stood beside Imani now, no longer hidden among the rings. "This is the part my people never understood," he said. Imani did not look away from the feed. "What part?" "How you can know the cost and still choose the burden." Her voice was rough. "We do not always choose it well." "No," Severin said. "But you keep choosing." Far below the cracked moon surface, Dr. Theo Arden and Lynn moved through corridors that were no longer stable. The heart's inner chambers shook with each pulse from the quiet seed. Golden rivers dimmed. Living root arches collapsed into ash-black strands. The wounded alien scout, still weak but walking now, pressed one trembling hand against the wall as if apologizing to the ancient structure for what his civilization had allowed. Theo's field AI was barely functioning, but it managed to render a path through the darkness toward the heart's central chamber. There, at the core of the moon, something vast beat slower and slower. It was not a heart in any biological sense, not muscle or organ, but a living star-root engine wrapped around a memory older than the Senate itself. Every pulse carried images of the Aurelian first minds, not as conquerors, but as builders kneeling beside young worlds, planting possibility, waiting for someone worthy to inherit what they could not keep. Lynn looked at Theo. "It is dying." "No," Theo said, though he did not know why he believed it. "It is waiting." "For what?" The walls answered in golden script, forming one phrase over and over around them. Line confirmation incomplete. Theo understood suddenly, and the realization almost broke him. The heart was not withholding help out of cruelty. It could not fully awaken until humanity completed the test it had been built to measure. The first condition had been compassion without ownership. The second was worse. Compassion without innocence. Protecting victims was one thing. Protecting enemies was the unbearable proof. He opened a channel to Juno. "Commander, the heart needs proof that we are saving Senate crews too. It is not enough to save the refugees." Juno's laugh came through cracked and bitter. "Tell the ancient moon it has excellent timing. Juno, if you stop, it may never fully wake." "I am not stopping." On the battlefield, the Resolute Dawn moved into the most dangerous corridor of the collapsing expanse. Ahead, the Senate flagship that had led the attack was trapped, its engines crippled, its crew broadcasting distress on every channel. No human ship had reason to save it. Every human ship had reason to let it fall. Juno ordered her carrier toward it anyway. The gravity shear tore through the Resolute Dawn's outer hull. Decks decompressed. Fires died in vacuum. The old carrier groaned like an animal refusing to lie down. Its tractor arrays locked onto the Senate flagship, but the mass was too great. The Black Needle pulled harder. The Dawn slid backward toward the Singularity. "Full reverse burn," Juno ordered. "Engines are past redline." Then introduce them to a new color. The engines ignited white. For 37 seconds, The Resolute Dawn held the corridor open. Human rescue craft escaped. Refugee barges cleared. Senate escape pods launched from the flagship and were caught by human shuttles waiting in the fire. Then the carrier's spine cracked. Imani saw it from the Senate chamber and took one step forward without meaning to. Juno! On the bridge, alarm screamed through smoke and blood. Juno looked at the last escape pod leaving the Senate flagship and smiled with half her face bruised purple. Condition met, the heart whispered. The cracked moon opened. Not like a weapon. Like a seed. Golden light erupted from its core in branching rivers that reached through the collapsing expanse and wrapped around every ship, every pod, every guilty survivor, every wounded human, every refugee, and the dying Resolute Dawn itself. But before the light could close around Juno's carrier, the quiet seed unfolded a second time, revealing a deeper black shape hidden inside it, and the heart's voice changed from pain to warning. Final condition awakened. Choose what humanity becomes. The deeper black shape inside the quiet seed did not look like a machine. It looked like an absence that had learned to think. It unfolded above the cracked moon in slow, impossible layers, drinking the golden light before it could reach the outer ships, pulling rescue corridors inward, turning the morning expanse into a bowl of collapsing stars. The heart below had opened to save everyone, but the Senate's final weapon had been designed for exactly that moment, not to kill a guardian while it slept, but to corrupt it at the instant it chose. On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Commander Juno Reyes watched the golden light freeze inches from her shattered viewport. Her carrier's spine was broken. Half her decks were dark. Every engine alarm had become meaningless because the ship no longer had enough working systems to obey them. Yet the last Senate escape pod was clear. The last refugee barge was outside the inner gravity shear. Her crew had done the impossible, and the impossible had not been enough. Commander, her tactical officer whispered, the black field is entering the heart's network. Juno looked at the screen. The golden branches that had wrapped around the battlefield were turning dark from their tips inward. The weapon was not destroying the heart. It was teaching it fear. It was forcing the ancient guardian to see every betrayal, every failure, every cruelty in the archive and conclude that power could only survive by becoming control. In the Celestial Senate, Ambassador Imani's soul understood the same truth a second later. The chamber feed showed the heart's light flickering between gold and black, between rescue and judgment. Around her, delegates who had spent their lives protected by Senate authority now looked like children standing beneath a cracking sky. Even the Chancellor, projected from his hidden sanctum, had gone silent as if he too realized the weapon he had awakened might not stop at humanity. Severin's voice was barely audible beside her. The quiet seed was never a kill switch. It was a temptation. Imani turned toward him. A temptation for what? For the Guardian to decide that the Senate was right about civilization, he said. That trust always fails. That mercy is weakness. That the only safe galaxy is one ruled by force. The heart spoke across every channel, but its voice was no longer warm. It was immense, wounded, and filled with every abandoned cry the Senate had buried. Final condition awakened. Humanity may command judgment. Humanity may command protection. Humanity may inherit the power to end the Senate and all who enabled it. The chamber froze. Every eye turned to Imani. There was offered at last. The thing every empire feared and every wounded species dreamed about in secret. Not survival. Not defense. Judgment. A force ancient enough to tear the Senate from the stars, precise enough to punish every guilty world, powerful enough to make humanity untouchable forever. The Chancellor found his voice. If you do this, you prove everything we said you were. Imani looked up at him and felt no fear. Only exhaustion. Only grief. Only the terrible clarity that comes when history places a weapon in your hand and waits to see whether your pain will aim it. She opened a channel to every system still receiving the broadcast. Her uniform was torn at the sleeve. Her face was lit by gold and black. Behind her, 300 civilizations watched the species they had exiled decide what power meant. Heart below, Imani said, humanity does not command judgment. The blackness paused. On the Resolute Dawn, Juno lifted her head. In the moon's inner chamber, Theo, Arden, and Lynn stood beneath collapsing golden roots as the words reached them. The wounded alien scout looked up, shaking, as if he had never heard a civilization refuse victory before. Imani continued. We will testify. We will remember. We will rebuild law where law became cowardice. We will hold the guilty accountable in daylight, not by becoming the dark thing they feared. But we will not inherit your power by using it to satisfy our anger. The heart's voice trembled. They betrayed you. Yes. They exiled you. Yes. They used the helpless as shields. Yes, Imani said, and her voice broke for the first time. And we saved them anyway. Not because they deserved it. Because if our compassion only works for the deserving, then it was never compassion. It was trade. Silence moved through the galaxy. Then Juno Reyes, aboard the dying Resolute Dawn, opened her own channel. Her face appeared beside Imani's on every screen, bruised, bloodied, and smiling like a human who had already made peace with the cost. Heart below, this is Commander Reyes. My ship is done. My crew is not. If you have any power left, take them first. Her crew erupted behind her, protesting at once, but Juno muted them with one hand. The heart answered softly. And you? Juno looked out through the broken viewport at the golden branches struggling against the black field. I am part of the ship. That was when the galaxy saw the final proof. Humanity had been offered domination and refused it. Humanity had been offered revenge and refused it. Humanity had been offered rescue and tried to give it. But the black infection shattered. The heart below fully awakened. The cracked moon unfolded into a colossal living star root network, golden branches spreading across the morning expanse faster than light, wrapping every vessel in protective warmth. The quiet seed screamed without sound as the heart pulled it apart thread by thread, not destroying the knowledge inside it, but separating fear from design, cruelty from power, corruption from creation. The Resolute Dawn vanished in gold and reappeared beyond the gravity tomb, broken but whole enough to live. Juno's crew dragged her from the command chair while she cursed them for ruining a dramatic ending. Across the Senate chamber, the Chancellor's authority collapsed before anyone formally removed him. Delegates stood, one by one, not in applause, but in witness. Species that had voted for exile lowered their banners. Others opened channels to Earth. Some asked forgiveness. Some offered evidence. Some simply said they were ready to speak truth. The heart's final message came not as command, but as memory from the Aurelian first minds. Trust the ones who protect what they do not own. Humanity did not build an empire from the ruins. Imani refused the throne no one had officially offered and proposed the open accord instead. No forced membership, no hidden archives, no abandoned distress calls, no law immune to witness. It was messy before it began. It would be argued over, damaged, repaired, and tested. In other words, it would be human. Weeks later, in the quiet after history changed, Theo stood inside the heart's central chamber as new golden roots reached toward the stars beyond the galactic rim. The heart had found something there. Not one signal. Many. Sleeping guardians. Waiting tests. Old promises buried in the dark. Theo touched the warm living wall and felt the vast intelligence turn toward him, patient and almost amused. Humanity had passed the first inheritance. The next ones were already waking.